Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. My name is Lee Hutchison, and Dallas King and myself make our way through the A24 filmography, and along the way bring you interviews with the talent involved in front of and behind the camera. So after a bit of a limbo period with a lack of A24 films making it to the UK, we're finally back today to review The Idol and can really look forward to some exciting releases in the next few weeks alone. We've got Past Lives going to be coming out next month, but we've also got Stephen Curry underrated on Apple TV in a few weeks, The Deepest Breath the same week on Netflix, and Talk to Me 2 in cinemas. So we're finally back, Dallas. We're finally able to eat.
I know, and well, I mean, I've kind of been snacking already in some ways because I've seen several of these films, even as far back as January, virtually at Sundance, and actually, Talk to Me again at Sundance London with a live screening along with Past Lives. So I've kind of been snacking away, and I've been waiting for your order has been lost, your delivery or Just Eat order has gone missing, but finally your replacement food is on its way, and it's safe to say I think you will dine better than perhaps you have done in the last week while preparing for this episode.
I know, it's been so frustrating. I've just been desperate to chat about these films with you, but yeah, frustratingly, it all seems to be landing at once. So yeah, I think even like that Netflix documentary, the Deepest Breath, comes out on like the 17th, and then just like a few days later, we get the Stephen Curry documentary, and then a mere week and a bit later on, we get Talk to Me too. So yeah, and then I suppose not long and after that, we've got Edinburgh Film Festival, so we get
Showing Up and Past Lives will be screening there. So yeah, you'll be fairly up to date, I think. I think then after that, and of course, could just slightly segue into A24 news, I guess. But Eternal Daughter. Well, we've already reviewed it, but Eternal Daughter is finally getting a release date in the UK. I think it was the 27th of October.
That's exactly it. Yeah, almost a year after it aired at sort of the London Film Festival. A very odd one that seemed to, despite the fact it had huge British money behind it, BFI. I think, did it show at Glasgow Film Festival, or did I imagine that?
I think you imagined it similar to the way that certain characters may have imagined other things in that film.
Yeah, so it's very bizarre. It's just been a real kind of dry spell for a while, and then here we go between sort of July and August. It's going to be getting through those A24 films, and one thing that frustrates me is still that we have no Rame season 3 yet here in the UK. That's the one I'm most desperate to kind of see. So. But we've had to make do with another A24 show, and it's from Euphoria creator Sam Levinson and The Weeknd. So previously had starred in A24's Uncut Gems and featured A24 alumni like Rachel Sennett from Bodies, Bodies, Bodies and Susanna Son from Red Rocket. And The Idol focuses on Jocelyn, an aspiring pop idol who, after having a nervous breakdown that causes her last tour to be cancelled, resolves to reclaim her title as the sexiest pop star in the US and begins a complex relationship with Tedros, a self-help guru and the head of a contemporary cult. So,
no idea who it could possibly have been based on. 20 years of American pop culture.
Absolutely not at all. So very similar to Euphoria, there was a huge wave of controversy before it even arrived. You know, last April when director Amy Seimetz, who might be familiar to people as the director of The Girlfriend Experience and She Dies Tomorrow, just suddenly exited with about sort of 80% of the 6-episode series finished. So HBO kind of turned around and confirmed that sort of there was going to be this major change to the show as well, and they'd be adjusting the cast and crew, and it came out as well sort of that The Weeknd, who is also a co-creator of the show, felt that the show was heading too much into a female perspective zone. So even on top of that, then Rolling Stone came out with a sort of behind-the-scenes expose, sort of describing that the show, according to insiders, was being turned into torture porn and rewrites, bloated scripts, all before we came to Cannes Film Festival, where again every so often a TV show gets kind of a bit of a premiere there, and this one got shown there, and the reviews were eviscerating of the show. So Dallas, before you had a chance to watch it, what were your expectations of this very kind of heralded TV show coming just mere week after the high of something like Succession on HBO? What were your expectations of all this controversy that we were going to be getting?
I mean, it was near impossible to avoid. I think the controversy, even if, as we do with many of these things, we try to sort of avoid certainly sort of trailers and sort of reviews and stuff. So we want to go in with to make our own opinion. But as someone who attends film festivals and follows film festivals, it was kind of impossible to ignore this one. I mean, my question even before watching The Idol was, what is it doing at the Cannes Film Festival? Cannes Film Festival. Here they're debuting 2 episodes of a TV series, and it's something that 2 episodes is normally like a Disney Plus launch event or something like that. Why it was there, and I mean, I guess maybe Sam Levinson's dad called in a couple of favors. Who knows? But yeah, so I mean, I wasn't. I think over the years that we've been doing this podcast, I mean, I've probably been a bit of a Sam Levinson apologist. I think we both greatly enjoyed Euphoria season 1. Euphoria season 2 was, I think, a very mixed bag in quality. I think storyline wise, there was a lot of subplots didn't really go anywhere. There was obviously the treatment of sort of Barbie Ferreira and her character in that, but there was the odd shining moment, such as the school play episode, which is one of the sort of highlights of the year for me. And I was definitely. It seems potentially, certainly now looking back at it, in the minority of. I rated Malcolm and Marie 5 stars when I first saw it. I thought it was fantastic, and that one was certainly sort of definitely informed by Sam Levinson's perspective of what was going on in Hollywood at the time, and since then. So, I tried to go in with as open a mind as possible. The Weeknd is someone who I probably kind of basically know most of, aware of him from Uncut Gems, actually, rather than any of his sort of music and stuff. He does seem to have quite a distinct voice. So I think if someone came on the radio, I'd be able to identify it was him. I certainly was able to identify that, despite the show being about someone called Jocelyn, most of the soundtrack seemed to be being performed by himself. And yeah, I mean, we'll get into that in a bit. So tried to go in with an open mind, but it's fair to say, having heard and seen everything about the show and up until this point, also having the fact that I watched the entire show after it finished its run, being released weekly as well, that my expectations were low. Were they met or succeeded? Well, I guess we're about to find out.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I was the same. I liked Malcolm and Marie. I particularly enjoyed Euphoria season 1, and I was kind of pretty excited about some of this cast. Like, I thought Susanna Son was brilliant in Red Rocket. Rachel Sennett was, she was really good in Bodies.
Anything that she's in, I will watch. I actually didn't realize it was Susanna Son until about halfway through the series, and then I was like, "Oh wait, that's the girl from Red Rocket." I think it was actually when she started singing at the piano, when it was I kind of recognized the voice from when she did that cover of "Bye Bye Bye" in Red Rocket. So
it's amazing that she's like third on the credits, like for someone that is barely in the show as well. And as I say, Rachel Sennett, brilliant in things like Shiva Baby, and Bodies. And it was particularly, I think she's just gas in general. So I was really looking forward to that, and I was just sort of really kind of curious because when I kind of heard about sort of this kind of like it's all about kind of fame and this pop star and sort of like maybe some of the controversy surrounding it, it reminded me of films that I've particularly enjoyed in the past few years, something like Vox Lux, for example. I'm really interested in films about musicians, from one end to say something like Vox Lux to all the way at the other end with like kind of something like Sing Street, for example, about an Irish kind of school band, for example. Like, it's just a genre I'm really interested in. And then thinking of Pleasure, which originally was going to be, I think, an A24 release. then they ditched it, and
Well, yes,
within
you bring up pleasure, and yes, there is certainly one plot point
oh
that
yes,
happens to transcend both films unexpectedly.
exactly, which I was very surprised at, and I was like, oh, I recognize things I particularly have enjoyed in these films and so on. And it was one of those ones I was kind of like aware of sort of the the negative reviews, but I was kind of not overly bothered by it. I didn't particularly read them, but I was aware of the
It
buzz. And
also makes it sort of more, hate watching, sort of, it can't possibly be as bad as they're talking about. So, it's that kind of, I have to watch this to see what all the fuss is about sort of thing. I think it almost helped, certainly to begin with, to get in the first couple of episodes. But, maybe after that, maybe not so much.
no, and I think it was one of those ones like I've been it was similar to what I thought of like that people have done with Euphoria, that there's sometimes been negativity for the sake of negativity, particularly when it comes to kind of Sam Levinson.
Some prudish people out there, eh?
Yeah, a little bit of this, and a lot of people have axe to grind. So it's kind of like, you know what, this is one where even if it's someone that I do trust, I kind of need to see this one for myself. Like, I think people do have their biases towards Levinson and so on, but when it comes to me, I think perhaps those views and opinions that perhaps maybe that didn't really apply with things like Euphoria certainly felt kind of justified here. So what was your reaction to it? Because I know you obviously, as you said, watched it kind of after the fact. What was your kind of reaction to this 6-episode show that was kind of knocked down to 5?
Yeah, no, I'd heard. So I was seeing that where it was sort of like people were saying there was an episode missing, and it's like, well, I mean, it's not like they've suddenly cancelled an episode, while after the show's been completed or something like that. But yeah, no, it was weird that everyone was expecting 6 and suddenly we only got 5. But I mean, it's probably for the best, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, it kind of started off okay, and then basically went downhill probably pretty much as soon as the weekend entered. The character of Tedros, you could see that it's a singer who is experiencing um, multiple crises, I guess. Crisis of confidence, crisis of her place in the media. She's been the subject of essentially sort of revenge porn. She's suffering a mental health crisis because she's lost her mother, and it turns out that her mother and her had a very complicated relationship. And then she meets this person who worms his way into her life, and then kind of takes over for seemingly his own gain and stuff like that, and she's exploited, and it makes for incredibly tough watching at times, in multiple ways. But yeah, just the character of Tedros, I mean, yes, he's meant to be an awful character, but if you are the co-creator of this show and you're basically putting yourself in this role, it just seems odd that you would do it and have zero redeeming characteristics in this. And also, I mean, if you're gonna, I mean, someone can make a character like this watchable and three-dimensional or whatever, but when you have the acting talent of The Weekend, it just doesn't come across. And there's certain elements of the sexual element of the show which goes in. I mean, I've got a lot of opinions on that, but yeah, it was just sort of downhill whenever he came on. And yeah, no, I think I could sum up my opinion of The Weekend basically by just using quotes from Uncut Gems. Who the hell is this guy? He looks like an idiot. And then the final comment, well, why don't you go fuck The Weekend? Which is essentially the plot of at least 3 or 4 episodes of the show. So yeah, no, I mean, Lily Rose Depp, I thought she was quite good in this at times. She does get some moments to shine. I mean, she sort of is able to portray someone on who's essentially from what it seems to be on the surface a vapid pop star and whatever, but it's just not enough underneath that for me to hold my attention. I actually spent the majority of the show wondering what would it have been like if Rachel Sennett had played Jocelyn. Someone like that had been in that role rather than what you would typically expect. The blonde sort of leggy, pop star to be like. What if it had been someone? What if Rachel Sennett? Because that's how good she's been in like Bodies, and actually Shiva Baby. That's what I spent going. It's like it feels like a waste of her in the part that she was in, and how good would this show potentially have been if she'd been in that role? But I think, as we'll probably discuss later on, I don't think even that would have saved the show from the direction it went into, basically down to decisions that were made higher up, I guess.
Yeah, it's almost interesting because, like, by all accounts, she wasn't in version 1.0, when it was Amy Seimetz kind of working on it. And that's the version I probably would have liked to have seen from what was kind of teased, especially in that kind of Rolling Stone article where when they were sort of talking with the people behind the scenes about sort of her version and then what kind of Sam Levinson did, that sort of like a lot of people got involved for what was going to be this sort of dark satire of fame, and the fame model in the 21st century, which we do see touches of at points in the film, the TV show, and that what it was going to be was about the things that we subject our talent and stars to, and the forces that put people in the spotlight and how they can be manipulated in the post-Trump world, and that basically what we kind of got in the end, people have kind of said that it's like it went from satire to the thing that it was satirizing, and like a lot of the blame has been kind of put down at sort of Levinson, where that he basically took a lot of those kind of overarching themes and messages and sort of basically swapped them out and really ramped up the sexual content, the nudity, and that even though there was plenty of that at times in Euphoria, they certainly ramped up with what they went with here and so on, and that felt very evident. It very much had that male gaze in it compared to perhaps that sort of that you would have maybe expected Amy Seimetz to have brought.
Yeah, no, I think that was probably my biggest problem with the way that the show was sort of portrayed and everything was handled. Because, I mean, even here in the UK, in I think like the last couple of weeks, there's been like a story sort of brewing where a former X Factor contestant, Rebecca Ferguson, has sort of been sort of going on social media, sort of talking about her experience of you know being a breakout star on the show, immediately getting signed to an agent, but not actually getting any say in who the agent was, and then feeling basically put through the mill of multiple performances, no real sort of aftercare or support. You're suddenly launched into this world of pop stardom, and you've got no mooring or anchoring to it, and you're just sort of left cast adrift. And it's like, oh well, she felt that none of her concerns were ever sort of handled and stuff like that. And then you see what's happening with Jocelyn in this, and that she's spiraling out of control, but everyone has such a big piece of the cake here, and they want to hold on to this cash cow, that everyone is basically exploiting her. And even though the best thing to do is, yes, cancel the tour, take a break, work on it. But no, everyone is so reliant on her as their sort of form of income that that's what it should have explored. But then it just becomes a sort of seedy, torrid sort of exploitation of like you say, the thing that it was meant to satirize. It just becomes a straight. It plays it straight instead. And I guess the biggest thing I could compare it to is Showgirls, Paul Verhoeven Showgirls from 1995, which is about a woman who enters into the world of, well, it was, here it's, pop stardom, but there it was, the strip clubs of Las Vegas. And, she's going to do anything she can to make a name for herself. And, it was a very salacious movie at the time, and at the time many people focused on the nudity and the sexual content and the violence and stuff like that. But yet, however, it has undergone a sort of reappraisal over the years. And actually, Paul Verhoeven is somebody, especially with something like even actually with RoboCop, but particularly sort of Starship Troopers, his work is very satirical, but often to the point where it goes over sort of mainstream audiences' heads. And I think the the problem here is it sort of has missed that like you say, it misses the satire and plays it straight to the point where it's really uncomfortable and unsettling to watch. And I think part of it is like you said, the fact that it is done through the male gaze as opposed to the female gaze. And I think it could have been, like you say, something perhaps potentially sort of, empowering, to see a woman sort of maybe potentially climb out of this black hole that she's in. But instead, it's all done from most of the part. It's done from sort of Tedros's perspective, and part of that, I guess, is down to the fact that the Weeknd's a co-creator, so therefore he's wanting, again, potentially more emphasis on his character. But yeah, and then the things that in season 2 of Euphoria, which started to feel sort of kind of exploitive, like you say, yeah, they are certainly ramped up here. And yeah, there is multiple sort of scenes of sort of violence, extortion, and sex, which are just, it's not even that it's uncomfortable to watch, it's just actively bad and actually unerotic as well. I was double checking because I was like, did Sam Levinson actually sort of direct all the episodes of Euphoria? And it turns out he did. I thought maybe, like with multiple shows, if it's a long show, sometimes you get multiple directors who work on different episodes, but no, apparently he did the whole thing. But then I did notice that he had actually also written the screenplay to Deep Water, the apparently, uh, erotic thriller.
Oh God, I forgot about how bad. Did you ever see that one?
I did see it, and I believe I did review it saying it was one of the most unerotic things I'd ever watched. And the sexiest scene in the film was actually a scene of two snails getting it on rather than and it's like I mean, I think it's like there's an episode of Friends where Joey is he's got heat with, like, it's like when he's sort of saying when a couple are getting it on off stage, they've got no chemistry on stage. And I think clearly that must have been the case with Ben Affleck and Anna de Armas at the time. They were together in real life, but clearly none of that chemistry came out in that film. So yeah, I was surprised and then yet not surprised. It kind of all made sense that he'd written the screenplay for that, because yes, there's a sort of sex scene at the end of episode 2, which I'm assuming must have been watched in Cannes just before they probably had to give it a sort of round of applause. I mean, I would have been probably booing. I thought Cannes was meant to boo things they didn't hate, after the Southland Tales thing. I'm surprised they weren't booing this one. But yeah, there's a sex scene where it's so unsexy. It came across to me like this man had never actually had touched a woman before in his life. The stuff that he was saying, it's like he'd chat GPT'd, what to say in a pornographic movie. It was just so cringeworthily awful. That it's like this bears no resemblance to, I think, what anyone would actually physically experience in the act of coitus. As I take a phrase from Big Lebowski.
I think what's even, there was elements that were thrown at it that is kind of like rape fantasy brought to life, and I think what makes that very, very fair criticism is that, like, The Weeknd is like a co-creator, producer on this, and he's essentially one of the co-leads on something like this. And he is getting to act out these scenes that they've drawn up, and someone that's complaining that it was too female friendly and so on, and some of the sex scenes you're watching, as you say, it's genuinely quite disturbing to watch and so on. And there is that line where we're used to that, perhaps, where some people have written these kind of love or romantic scenes, from all different types, and they perform them. Whereas this feels like uncomfortable, where you're watching it, where you're going, what is the benefit of such kind of quite graphic sexual scenes, especially the ones where it's like, kind of, especially with the brush, for example, and some of the penetrative sex is going on.
And then there's the one where he's basically sort of touching her to the point of climax in front of everyone so that she's able to hit a certain note in a song. And it's just like, I mean, it's uncomfortable for the people in the room. It's uncomfortable for the people at home to be watching as well. It's like, yeah, it's just, yes, you're meant to fully get this idea that this man is, abusing his position of power within this relationship, but knowing that this person has been written and created by the person who's acting it out. Yeah, there are some, I guess, there was a lot of controversy, I guess, after the song Blurred Lines, but the lines are certainly blurred here, and you do have to wonder why have you written this character this way and want to perform it for the world to see, it's just a bit very, very uncomfortable, and questions need to be asked. Because I mean, I did find it funny. Sorry, just to say, I did find it funny that like one of the opening scenes is like this kid sort of really stressing out during a photo shoot because you can see Jocelyn's nipple through her dress and whatever, and he's like, but the nudity rider says that we can't have this, and basically he's then locked in a cupboard out of the way so they can continue with the photo shoot. And it's just like, it feels like the oh, I can't, what do they call them now? Is it an
Intimacy coordinator.
intimacy coordinator? I mean, it must have been like the most impossible job in the world to be an intimacy coordinator, if they even had one on this show.
To put it into perspective, it came up in some of our interviews with like the After Sun team, where that even had like an intimacy coordinator. It's something that's quite normalized just now, and it protects, like you're probably people listening to this going, what intimacy was there in something like After Sun? But it's maybe like young kids kissing or kind of making out, etc. And it's just there just to make sure that people feel comfortable. It's a safe space and so on. And it's one of these ones where it reminded me almost of his involvement of like classically dropping a Star Trek reference. But there's a thing where like in Star Trek where there's like the holodeck where you can go in and bring any fantasy you want to life, whether that's Robin Hood or your favorite bar, and just live that world, and people can be brought to life. And there's always a thing of it where people can go, well, won't people just go there and just like fuck around and so on? Or just like they could go, do you know what, I'm going to make a Lily Depp character and I'm going to have sex with her, I'm going to manipulate that. It's essentially that kind of scenario. And with so much of the show felt like edgy for the sake of it, where I was sitting on my couch just eye rolling at stuff where it's like, oh yeah, he's kind of got that rapey vibe, but I kind of like it. And some of the sex scenes and just how it was going was just, it was quite embarrassing, really. And the parts that I, even with the first episode, I was kind of like, I think this might not be too bad, because I think that one was quite strong, relatively speaking, because it felt like it brought together a lot of the kind of the support and network around sort of Jocelyn, with like sort of her manager and sort of assistant, creative director, live tour manager. And I found that all quite fascinating to watch. As you say, sort of like, they're all relying on her and making this work, and some of the conversations that are going on around there. And part of me would almost want to see like a version that you see it sometimes where like your main character, sometimes in the case of like the president, for example, like in say like Veep, for example, is never spoken about, that they're always a presence. And I'd maybe like to have seen sort of like Hank Azaria's character, Jane Addams kind of character, who I think must have been cast by sort of the original director, because obviously she was in She Dies Tomorrow. And I'd love to have seen the network around this like performer, and how they all try to balance that and make things work, and have her as a larger than life character that we never really see. I would have been interested in that.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's Dan Levy, who was there for a couple of minutes and then disappeared, and I was got the shock of my life when Eli Roth turned up as a tour manager called Finkelstein. But actually, as you talk about it now, I'm now in that sort of thing where I'm now seeing a better version of the show. And it's like almost like, I don't know if anyone remembered the film Passengers from a few years ago that had Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt in it. And well, spoilers, but Chris Pratt essentially is woken up out of deep sleep on a passenger ship which is going to a new planet to start a new life, and he gets bored and basically decides to unthaw and wake up a really hot girl in the form of Jennifer Lawrence so he can hang out with her and stuff like that. And then they fall, they start a romance and stuff, but then she eventually finds out that actually he did this and he's a creep, and they have to work it out after that. Whereas you watch it and then you realize that actually the better movie is starting with the two of them meeting after waking up after this incident, and then going through the whole romance, and then it being revealed that he's a creep. And then the ending happens where, and instead of him living, he sacrifices himself to save it. And then you've got the quandary of Jennifer Lawrence is then on her own. Would she wake someone up in order to not be alone after that? There's a better movie if you re-edit it and stuff like that. And now I'm thinking this show could potentially actually be really good if it may be focused on one incident, like this star who's about to go back on tour and then she's the subject of this revenge porn incident, but then having almost like a different episode from the point of view of each of the characters, like you say, the manager, the tour manager, her agent, her choreographer, and all that. If it had been like, like you say, she's not the main character in this, she's around, and it's like basically the same episode from different perspectives. Something like that could be really, really interesting, because you then get more information on how it actually truly affects everyone and stuff like that. And you could have eliminated the Tedros character almost completely. So here we go. Yeah, the Idol season 2. We're pitching it now. Basically, multi-series a season event, where we take one incident and put it from the view of different people.
And do
So
you know
there
where
we
the
go.
the best example of that was? And again, people that did it better. One of my favorite films of the past few years, Alex Ross Perez, Her Smell. I don't know, for people that might not have seen that one, I would.
I still haven't seen that actually. Does it kind of do that sort of thing?
Yeah, basically, it's one of the kind of classic people that would say like it's got A24 vibes or like A24 adjacent. But it's basically like Elizabeth Moss plays like this grunge rock star of the 90s that has drug problems, like abuse problems, and so on. And the film is kind of very similar to that Steve Jobs film, broken down into like 3 parts and so on. And it's one of the most anxiety inducing kind of things I ever watched. And again, it breaks that down of like, okay, she's just come off stage and you've got all those hangers on. You've got the assistant, you've got the manager, you've got the live manager, you've got the band, and how they all interact. And it just ranks up the tension. And I think like when I watched this, I was like, there's probably a version of this which is quite a good film that could be done. The idea of sort of like power dynamics between, think of like someone like Taylor Swift. You could argue her fans, there's almost like that cult devotion and following and so on. And what happens when someone like that meets that sort of that outsider that is actually a cult leader, and the power dynamics between the two and so on, which would be quite fascinating. And, it's a genre that is really well explored with much better stuff, for people. I'd recommend, Vox Lux, Her Smell, for example, that really dive into these things so much better. I mean, I watched this and I think they'd spent 54 to 75 million on sort of making this kind of show, if not much more, and basically doing similar to what we've seen with many films recently, where they're like, something's nearly finished, they're like, scrap it, we're going to get a new director in, change it all around, blah blah blah. And like the amount of waste that HBO have put on to this is absolutely shocking and so on. And I'm not surprised that there's not, well, it's not been official, but I very much doubt we're going to get a season 2. I think the ultimate way they ended that show with this montage of, here's the set, isn't everyone happy, we're having a great time, we're all having a ball, you're like, that's them basically trying to say, screw you, Rolling Stone, this was actually a really positive set, it wasn't a place where people felt things. They was like, you don't do that at the end of season 1 if if you are coming back. I mean, I don't see a season 2 happening. I'm genuinely wouldn't be surprised if HBO do what others have done, especially them, and gone, let's just pull that all together, get a tax write-off. An element, I maybe wouldn't be surprised on that.
Yeah, I mean, what did you make of the final episode? Because I mean, I guess we can go into sort of spoiler chat here, but so essentially, we've been following the story of sort of Tedros, who's been worming his way in to basically take over as essentially the number one advisor and boyfriend of Jocelyn, and it's got to the point where you know he's in control of everything, but she invited this, she's found out that one of the people that he knew is actually going to be, she's going to be replaced on what was going to be her new hit single. So she invites her ex-boyfriend round, they have sex, and then there's a setup where basically he's then sort of accused of rape and stuff like that. And then we sort of go to the next episode, and it's basically Jocelyn's like, oh yeah, no, by the way, I kind of knew that you were doing this, and now I'm in control, and you're getting kicked out, and you're gone, you're nothing. I'm now in total control of everything that I was doing the whole time. And then right at the end, there's another switch around where it's actually, she's gotten, the managers have paid off this guy and whatever, and he's out of her life. But then she takes him back, and he's the love of her life, and it's just like, what on earth is going on here? It's like it made no narrative sense. It's like, I don't know if part of it was from the original script or whatever, but it's like it made no sense in terms of narrative, in terms of like the characters and how they were acting. I mean, it was quite the switch up for Jocelyn in the first place, but then take him back at the end, it just complete. I mean, if anyone was still kind of with the show in from a narrative sense, I think it surely must have lost them by that point. It just was just. I mean, I had the same sort of reaction as the managers and that when they saw the Weekend walk on stage at the end. They were like, "What the fuck is going on here?"
Yeah, I had the similar approach. Like you could maybe see that there was an extra episode out there, and they've condensed it all down. I mean, the showcase was
Because it
okay.
was like was it something like 6 months later, sort of hard cut at one point. And it's just like, yeah, we have to kind of wrap up the show now, don't we? Because
I liked Susanna Son when she was performing. I mean, she is really good and a real standout. But this kind of like again, there was elements where again it's quite interesting just watching this like dynamic of like the manager, the tour manager, like assistant, how that's all performing in a room and stuff. Quite interesting. But like when I was watching the end, I was like, I have no problem with like an ending where a character makes like a terrible decision, but I was watching that going, I, I hate when things ask me as an audience member to ignore everything I've seen, and I have no doubt people remain in toxic relationships and that dynamic and how they continue to go on, but I couldn't believe it. Like it was just not create a decision that made sense to what I'd seen and what I'd learned, and it was just a betrayal of the characters and what I had just watched 15-20 minutes earlier, and I just kind of checked out. I was like, it is a crap TV show, unfortunately, and that ending solidified that.
yeah, because it was a shame because I actually thought the Weekend was going to get whacked. He's going to get driven off and like shot in the desert somewhere or something because. Uh, I mean, it was great. I mean, Hank Azaria, he does have that great scene. I thought the bit where he started talking, telling Tedros the story of Little Red Riding Hood and stuff like that. I thought that was a great scene, and it's like, oh, Hank Azaria, the voice of all the characters in The Simpsons and stuff like that, and Roger from Minsk in Friends and stuff. It's like, oh, this guy's actually proper menacing here, and it's like, well, I would like to see more of this from him, in other shows and films and stuff like that. I was like, this is showing a different side to him, and I like it. I'm digging it.
He was really good, and I mean that's an interesting show. I mean, he was good. I mean, Eli Roth wasn't particularly special, but I mean, it was amusing enough. And Jane Addams was good, and Devine J. Randolph, who was like the co-manager, was also good. Like that's an interesting show and roles and so on. And yeah, it's just one of those ones. Like even sort of the character Jocelyn, I just didn't find her particularly interesting, and so on. And yeah, there's elements where again she kind of alludes to her past and that, which were kind of fascinating, but just like as a character, I felt she really, I guess that's part of it, that she really had any sort of agency, and just yeah, it's one of those ones when perhaps that management team weren't there, my interest went down, because even sort of like they turned Rachel Sennett, one of these like really charismatic individuals, she's hysterical on like social media, etc. It's just like she's painfully boring in this as well. She is just like utterly vanilla. Like it was just there was no real good character development, and the only reason perhaps this management team worked was because they were sort of larger than life and highly amusing, and those were the only times I ever felt like I was engaged with the show.
Yeah, it's like sometimes the material was so poorly written that you have to kind of go swing for the fences in terms of your over the top performances to try and make it, some sort of impression.
So any final thoughts on The Idol?
Probably unlike shows like Pop Idol and American Idol, this one probably won't run and run, and like you say, I think this type of story has been done so much better in films like Vox Lux, that yeah, you should probably just go watch Vox Lux instead if you want something about a female pop star who's been put through the ringer and suffering the price of fame and whatever. Yeah, that's probably the best example of something like that, and it features an incredible performance from Natalie Portman. So yeah, and it's got A24 vibes as well. So it's a good substitute, and it won't. And it's not 5 episodes long. It's only like about an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. So you can save yourself time as well. So
Well, thanks everyone for listening. Obviously, we're going to be a bit more prevalent in your ears in the coming weeks as we get back into sort of enjoying some A24 films, and I'm really looking forward to chatting about them with you, Dallas. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye.